Most people don't hate intelligence. They hate what intelligence makes them feel about themselves. Here's the part nobody says out loud. You're not being rejected because you're rude, antisocial, or trying to act superior. You're being resisted because you refuse to shrink your thinking to make social life easier for everyone else. You walked into rooms as yourself, fully formed, mentally present and unedited, and that alone disrupted the unspoken agreement that everyone should stay comfortably average. There is a quiet social rule most people live by. Don't make anyone feel exposed. Laugh at the joke even if it's stupid. Nod even if it makes no sense. Play confused so no one feels slow. Dumb yourself down so the group stays relaxed. It's not written anywhere, but it's enforced everywhere, and the moment you break it, the mood shifts. Suddenly, you're too serious, too intense, or my personal favorite, you think too much, as if thinking were a character flaw and not the entire point of having a brain. Here's a fact that makes this even clearer. Studies on social conformity show that people feel more psychological safety around those who mirror their level of understanding, not those who exceed it. Translation: it's not that you're wrong, it's that you're inconvenient. Your clarity creates pressure, your awareness raises the standard, and your refusal to pretend creates an awkward silence where people are forced to meet themselves or get irritated and blame you instead. Add a little humor to this, because it's almost ridiculous. You could be standing there, minding your business, saying absolutely nothing, and still somehow be accused of doing too much. Congratulations. You've reached a level of self-awareness where your existence alone is considered a social disturbance. This conversation isn't about being superior. It's about being unwilling to self-betray for comfort. It's about understanding why your refusal to dumb yourself down doesn't just confuse people. It quietly angers them. And once you see this clearly, you'll stop trying to fix a problem that was never yours to begin with. Number 1, your clarity exposes how much of their personality is performance. Most people are not living as themselves. They are managing impressions. They adjust their tone, soften their opinions, pretend to agree, laugh a little louder than they mean to, and dull their thinking just enough to stay included. It becomes second nature. Over time, that performance feels like identity. Then you walk in, clear, grounded, and mentally awake, and something uncomfortable happens. Without trying, you highlight how much effort everyone else is putting into pretending. Your clarity isn't loud. It's not aggressive. It's not even confrontational. That's what makes it dangerous. You don't scramble for approval. You don't overreact to fit the mood. You don't pretend confusion to keep the peace. You respond honestly, think fully, and move through conversations without constantly adjusting yourself. To someone who survives socially by performing, this feels like exposure. People around you start to feel seen in ways they didn't consent to. Not because you pointed anything out, but because your presence removes their cover. When you don't fake interest, their fake enthusiasm stands out. When you don't exaggerate reactions, their overacting looks obvious. When you don't play along, the script breaks. And once the script breaks, people panic. That panic turns into irritation. They label you as dry, hard to read, or acting different. What they're really reacting to is the fear that their own personality is mostly borrowed behavior. You remind them that they've been editing themselves for so long they don't know where the performance ends and the person begins. This is why they get annoyed instead of curious. Curiosity would require honesty. Honesty would require admitting they've been living on autopilot. It's easier to be angry at you than to question years of self-abandonment. You're not making them uncomfortable on purpose. You're just refusing to fake. And in a world where social survival depends on constant adjustment, authenticity feels like a threat. Not because it's cruel, but because it's clean. It doesn't hide. It doesn't bend. It doesn't perform. And for people who have built their entire sense of belonging on performance, that kind of clarity feels like an accusation, even when none was ever made. Number 2, you force people to confront the intelligence they abandoned. When you refuse to dumb yourself down, you don't just stand apart. You hold up a mirror to everyone around you. Most people at some point made a choice. They traded curiosity, sharpness, and depth for comfort, approval, or simply the relief of blending in. They decided that social acceptance was more important than thinking for themselves. They stopped asking hard questions, stopped challenging their assumptions, and stopped pushing their own understanding. And that's fine until someone like you shows up. You think fully, speak honestly, and navigate life without constantly editing yourself to fit in. You're mentally present in ways they aren't. You don't hesitate, you don't dilute, and you don't soften your ideas just so they feel safer. And because of that, people around you are forced to notice what they've abandoned. They don't hate your intelligence. They hate the reminder of the parts of themselves they let go of because being comfortable felt easier. This creates a tension that's invisible to you but very real to them. Your presence becomes a trigger. Every clever observation, every clear opinion, every moment of unapologetic thought is a silent challenge. It doesn't matter that you're not criticizing them. It doesn't matter that you don't intend to make them feel small. Your very existence, your refusal to shrink your mind, forces them to confront a truth they buried long ago. They stopped growing, and now they're being shown what they've been missing. It's uncomfortable, and discomfort breeds resentment. They may call you arrogant, condescending, or intense, but what they're really reacting to is the pressure you create by simply being yourself. You're not attacking them, you're exposing the gap between who they could be and who they chose to become. And that exposure is powerful, it's real, and it's unavoidable. You become a reminder of their intellectual compromises, a living proof of the curiosity, boldness, and mental clarity they left behind. And because it's uncomfortable to see one's own stagnation reflected in someone else, people often react with irritation instead of reflection, anger instead of admiration, and avoidance instead of engagement. Number 3, your presence breaks the illusion that mediocrity is normal. Most people live their lives under a comfortable lie, that being average is all anyone can aspire to, that comfort and safety are the measures of success, and that questioning, thinking deeply, or standing out is somehow dangerous. It's a social contract built on quiet compromise, where everyone agrees to stay within safe limits. They tell themselves it's normal because it's easier than confronting the truth, that they've allowed their potential to shrink for convenience, popularity, or avoidance of conflict. Then you show up. You refuse to play the game. You don't mute your thoughts, lower your standards, or shrink your abilities to blend in. You operate at your full level of awareness, clarity, and competence, and suddenly the invisible walls people built around themselves start to tremble. What was once acceptable now feels shallow. What was once enough now feels small. You're not criticizing anyone, and you're not asking them to change, but your mere existence exposes the uncomfortable truth. Mediocrity was never a rule, it was a choice. This is what creates friction. People don't always get angry at excellence itself. They get frustrated because excellence shatters their illusions about what's normal and safe. Your competence, your clarity, your unwillingness to dumb yourself down, it forces them to look at their own lives, at the compromises they've made, at the energy they spend pretending to be someone they're not. And in a world where self-delusion is a shield against insecurity, exposing the truth feels threatening. Your presence becomes a silent accusation without a single word being said. You're proof that the ceiling they accepted for themselves was arbitrary. You reveal the quiet lie they've been living under, and that revelation makes them uneasy. They may call you intimidating, aloof, or difficult, but underneath it all, they are simply confronted with a reality they chose to ignore. You make them see that mediocrity isn't normal, it's optional, and that realization can be far more uncomfortable than any confrontation. Being yourself at full strength doesn't just break the illusion, it forces everyone else to reckon with what they've been settling for, and that kind of clarity is rarely appreciated because it's easier to be irritated than to be honest with oneself. Number 4, you don't participate in intellectual charity, and that scares people. Most people expect life to be a performance where your intelligence is softened just enough to make them feel comfortable. They've learned over time that if someone thinks too fast, speaks too clearly, or notices too much, it can make them feel small. So the world operates on a quiet form of intellectual charity. People forgive ignorance, nod at nonsense, and tolerate shallow thinking, all so no one feels exposed. It's not spoken about, but everyone knows the rules. You break that without even trying. You don't simplify yourself to make others feel smart. You don't pause to explain what is obvious to you, and you don't temper your clarity to avoid intimidating someone. You think at your natural pace, you speak at your natural depth, and you process the world as you always have. That refusal to participate in intellectual charity terrifies people because it exposes them. When you don't bend, people are forced to face the gap between your level of awareness and their own. It's uncomfortable because they've been pretending for so long that it doesn't exist. And this is why people often misinterpret your behavior as arrogance or condescension. They're not responding to you, they're reacting to their own insecurities. They're used to everyone lowering themselves for social peace. And when you refuse, it destabilizes the whole dynamic. Every clear thought you express becomes a mirror showing what they've avoided thinking. Every honest statement becomes a challenge they didn't ask for. Ironically, you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just existing without compromise, refusing to dilute your intelligence for the sake of comfort. And that honesty is intimidating. It forces people to confront a truth they don't want to see, that they've been surviving on mental shortcuts, half-truths, and performances. Your clarity is a light they didn't switch on, and for some, it's easier to be angry at you than to deal with the reflection. By refusing to participate in intellectual charity, you become a quiet disruptor. Not loud, not combative, but unavoidable. You remind people that life isn't meant to be dimmed to make others feel safe, and that kind of presence is both rare and unsettling. Number 5, you remove the social hierarchy they depend on. Most social interactions are built on invisible ladders. People jockey for position without even realizing it. Who gets noticed, who gets approval, who is seen as fun, smart, or important. These hierarchies are subtle, but they structure how people behave. Some are louder, some flatter themselves, some exaggerate kindness or charm, and others strategically hide their flaws. Everyone knows the rules, and everyone plays the game to survive. It's exhausting, but it's predictable. Then you appear, refusing to play. You don't exaggerate your traits to impress, you don't minimize your presence to avoid challenge, and you don't dance around expectations to stay liked. You show up fully and authentically, at your natural level of awareness and engagement. And the effect is immediate. The invisible ladders collapse under your presence. People who relied on constant comparison, subtle manipulation, or performative behavior suddenly have nothing to measure against. Their carefully constructed social maps no longer make sense. This is why your authenticity triggers frustration. You're not trying to dominate anyone or prove superiority, but by refusing to participate in the ladder game, you strip others of their usual methods of self-validation. When a person's confidence, influence, or sense of worth is built on these hierarchies, your indifference to them feels threatening. You aren't competing, you are just being. And that simple act exposes how much of their social skill is not skill at all, but carefully curated performance. The result is tension. People may label you aloof, difficult, or not team-oriented, but what's really happening is their structure is being destabilized. They are forced to navigate a social space where merit, intelligence, and presence exist independently of manipulation or approval seeking. That is disorienting because it removes control, and human beings instinctively resist losing control, even when they have no right to it. By refusing to engage in social hierarchy, you highlight its artificiality. You show that connection, respect, and influence don't need to be manufactured. They can exist naturally when someone refuses to compromise themselves. And for people who depend on the latter, that realization is as infuriating as it is undeniable. Number 6, you make small talk feel like what it really is, emotional filler. Small talk is sold as connection, but most of the time it's nothing more than emotional filler. It's a social lubricant designed to keep people comfortable, to distract them from the fact that most interactions are shallow, and to prevent anyone from having to face the reality of who they really are. People laugh at jokes they don't find funny, comment on things they don't care about, and nod at statements that don't matter, all to maintain the illusion of harmony. It's an unspoken rule. Don't rock the boat, don't get too real, and don't force anyone to think too hard. You break that without meaning to. You don't fake interest, you don't inflate reactions, and you don't pretend that filler is meaningful. You respond authentically, you engage with depth, you speak and listen at your natural level of awareness, and suddenly everyone around you notices the gap. The scripted flow of small talk falters. The jokes feel empty, the comments feel shallow, and the smiles feel forced. What used to be comfortable background noise now feels exposed. People don't usually react with curiosity. They react with irritation because they've built their social lives on the assumption that filler is enough. Your refusal to participate in that makes them confront the hollowness they've been avoiding. Every conversation becomes a subtle test. Can they keep up, or do they crumble under the pressure of your clarity? And even when they can keep up, it's uncomfortable. Small talk was their safety net, and you just pulled it out from under them. You aren't being difficult or aloof, you're being real. And that reality doesn't fit into their carefully constructed social script. You make them realize that comfort is often chosen over substance, that connection is frequently sacrificed for convenience, and that most interactions are more about appearances than authenticity. You shine a light on what they've been willing to ignore, and that honesty feels like disruption. You remind people that small talk is optional and that real engagement requires effort, depth, and courage, things many would rather avoid. By refusing to participate in the emotional filler of small talk, you force the room to wake up. And that awakening, while subtle, is enough to make people uncomfortable, frustrated, and undeniably aware of their own avoidance. Number 7, your self-respect reads as arrogance to insecure minds. Self-respect is quiet. It doesn't need to be shouted, flaunted, or justified. It's the simple refusal to compromise your values, intelligence, or presence to make others feel comfortable. Yet, to people who live on insecurity and constant validation, self-respect looks loud, aggressive, or arrogant. They are used to a world where ego and approval are currency, where bending, apologizing unnecessarily, and minimizing oneself is the standard for keeping peace. When you refuse to participate in that economy, your normal behavior becomes a challenge. You don't laugh at jokes that insult your intelligence. You don't fake agreement to avoid conflict. You don't apologize for knowing what you know. You don't shrink yourself to make others feel bigger. To someone who built their identity around others' perception, this looks threatening. Your self-respect is an unspoken refusal to play by their rules, and rules are what make them feel safe. When rules break, people panic. The irony is that they aren't actually responding to you. They are reacting to themselves. They are used to people lowering themselves constantly, so when you simply exist without compromise, they feel exposed. Every calm, clear, unapologetic statement you make shines a light on how much they've been bending, flattering, and shrinking just to survive socially. That reflection is uncomfortable. Instead of facing it, they label you as arrogant. It's easier for them to externalize the problem than to admit their own compromise. Your self-respect doesn't intimidate because it's forceful. It intimidates because it's consistent and undeniable. It's the quiet knowledge that you will not betray your own mind or your own values for approval. And in a world where most people survive by lowering themselves to blend in, that refusal feels like a confrontation. You're not trying to dominate or belittle anyone. You're simply operating on your own terms, and that is enough to make insecure minds spin. Your self-respect is not arrogance. It's a mirror reflecting everything others have surrendered, and their discomfort is proof that they've been living below their potential. Number 8, you don't rescue people from their own shallow thinking. Most people have grown comfortable with their mental shortcuts, half-truths, and shallow observations. Over time, they've trained themselves to avoid deep thought because it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or simply unnecessary for the life they've built. The world around them adjusts to accommodate this. People laugh along, nod along, and provide constant reassurance so that no one feels challenged, and everyone maintains the illusion that what they think and say is enough. You break that without trying. You don't slow down your thought process to match theirs. You don't dumb down your ideas, over-explain concepts, or tiptoe around gaps in understanding. You let your clarity exist fully, even if it exposes theirs. This isn't cruelty, it's honesty. And that honesty makes people uncomfortable because it forces them to recognize the limits of their own thinking. They're not used to having someone operate on a level they haven't bothered to maintain, and your presence makes that difference impossible to ignore. They expect you to adjust, to rescue them from the discomfort of realization. If you were polite or careful, you could cushion the blow, simplify, explain, nod, or pause to let them catch up. But you don't. You operate at your natural level of understanding and leave them to confront the gap on their own. That refusal to act as a crutch feels threatening to those who rely on intellectual charity to feel competent. They interpret your clarity as judgment, even though you never judge. You just refuse to rescue. This is why people often react defensively. They might call you cold, condescending, or too much, because facing their own superficial thinking is uncomfortable. It's easier to externalize frustration onto you than to admit that they've tolerated mental laziness for far too long. Your refusal to rescue people from shallow thinking forces accountability, even if they hate it. You remind them that growth isn't optional for life to be real, and that mental effort isn't negotiable for respect. And that reminder, while simple in its execution, is a disruption for anyone who has spent years surviving comfortably beneath their potential. Your presence is a silent challenge, and that makes you unforgettable. Number 9, you disrupt their emotional economy. Most people manage life through a delicate balance of comfort, avoidance, and validation. They have invisible rules about what they can feel, what they can express, and how others should behave so that their sense of stability isn't threatened. Relationships, conversations, even casual interactions are often built on this unspoken emotional economy. Everyone gives just enough to keep the balance, and no one rocks the boat too hard. It's predictable, manageable, and safe. Then you appear fully aware and unwilling to compromise. You don't adjust your energy to soothe insecurities. You don't pretend ignorance to make others feel smart. You don't suppress honesty to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. You are fully present in mind, body, and emotion, and your consistency exposes the delicate, artificial balance everyone else has been depending on. Suddenly, the emotional rules they've been following no longer apply, and the stability they relied on feels fragile. This disruption is invisible, but it is powerful. People around you start to feel smaller, more vulnerable and unsettled, even if you've done nothing to attack them directly. Your presence alone forces them to confront the parts of themselves they've hidden or ignored, the shortcuts, the compromises, the fears, and the weaknesses. They weren't used to seeing those parts reflected back without judgment, and the lack of protection feels threatening. The frustration they express isn't about you. It's about the imbalance you create in their world. They are not angry at your authenticity. They are angry that your authenticity highlights their own inconsistencies. You shine a light on every insecurity they've been ignoring, every lie they've been telling themselves, and every standard they've avoided meeting. By refusing to soften, dilute, or adjust for their comfort, you make them confront reality. You remind them that emotional manipulation, avoidance, and compromise are not the same as strength or stability. And that kind of disruption, while silent and subtle, is unavoidable. You make them feel whether they like it or not, and in a world where most people hide from feelings, that is more unsettling than any confrontation could ever be. Number 10, you refuse to confuse likability with authenticity. Most people have been taught, quietly but relentlessly, that being liked requires compromise. Smile when you don't feel like it. Nod when you disagree. Pretend ignorance when you actually know. Adjust your personality, tone, and opinions so others can feel comfortable. Over time, this becomes a habit, and many lose track of where their true self ends and their performance begins. They confuse approval with worth, popularity with respect, and convenience with integrity. You don't. You show up fully as yourself, unfiltered, unapologetic, and unwilling to bend just to be liked. You don't shrink, dilute, or tiptoe. You engage honestly, speak clearly, and act consistently with your own values, no matter who is watching. That level of authenticity is rare, and it's disorienting to people who built their lives around being palatable. They are so accustomed to managing perceptions that encountering someone who doesn't manage them feels like a confrontation, even though you aren't trying to confront anyone. Your refusal to prioritize likability exposes an uncomfortable truth. Most people's social armor is not about charm or personality. It's about protection. It shields them from criticism, discomfort, and the demand to be real. When you operate outside of that system, you force them to recognize the compromises they've accepted in order to be safe or liked. And that recognition isn't pleasant. This is why you are often misunderstood. You're labeled as cold, difficult, or arrogant, not because you are those things, but because your authenticity challenges the way others measure themselves. They are forced to confront the fact that liking someone isn't the same as respecting them, and being accepted isn't the same as being true. By refusing to confuse likability with authenticity, you set a new standard. You show that connection, influence, and respect don't require deception or compromise. Your presence reminds people that being yourself is not negotiable, and that trying to bend for approval is a choice, not a necessity. That clarity is unsettling, but it is also undeniable. It's rare, it's uncompromising, and it cannot be ignored. Number 11, you don't translate your depth into entertainment. Most people are comfortable with intelligence only when it's packaged for consumption. They like it when someone is witty, flashy, dramatic, or entertaining, because then depth becomes something safe, digestible, and fun. If intelligence comes raw, quiet, consistent, unapologetic, they feel exposed. They are used to performances where complexity is made palatable. Depth is acceptable only when it's a show, a product, or a distraction, not when it exists naturally and unedited. You don't perform, you don't exaggerate, dramatize, or dress up your thinking to make it easier for others to process. You exist at your natural level of awareness, your thoughts fully formed, your insights clear, and your presence grounded. You don't convert understanding into jokes, stories, or spectacle for approval. You are simply being, thinking, and speaking as you always do. That kind of raw authenticity is rare, and it makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't fit into the usual social framework. Your depth exposes a truth most people avoid, that they are used to consuming intelligence, not engaging with it. They rely on entertainment to make complexity palatable, and they avoid facing real thought because it requires effort, reflection, and sometimes uncomfortable self-awareness. When you don't translate your depth into a show, you disrupt that system. You force them to meet reality on your terms, and that can be unsettling. This is why you're often misunderstood. People may call you serious, intense, or even boring, because they can't process someone whose intelligence doesn't serve their need for stimulation or reassurance. They are reacting not to you, but to the gap between what they are comfortable with and what you naturally offer. They are forced to reckon with the fact that depth doesn't need to be entertaining to exist, and that real intelligence doesn't require validation to be valuable. By refusing to translate your depth into entertainment, you create a presence that is rare and unavoidable. You remind people that true awareness isn't performative, that clarity doesn't need applause, and that the quiet, unedited mind is far more powerful than any performance could ever be. It's subtle, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. Number 12. You expose how fragile their confidence actually is. Confidence is often an illusion, carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. Most people have built it not on true self-assurance, but on layers of approval, social validation, and avoidance of situations that could challenge their sense of worth. They laugh when they don't feel like it, agree when they internally question, and downplay their thoughts to avoid conflict. It's a fragile scaffolding, and they rely on others lowering themselves to keep it from collapsing. Then you show up. You don't adjust your presence, soften your clarity, or tiptoe around their insecurities. You operate at your natural level of awareness, your thoughts fully formed, your opinions unfiltered, and your energy unbending. And just by existing this way, you reveal a truth they've been avoiding. Their confidence is not as solid as they pretend. Every time you speak with clarity, every time you hold your ground without compromise, you create a subtle pressure that highlights what they've been hiding from themselves. This exposure is uncomfortable, and often they react defensively. They label you as intimidating, condescending, or too much. But what's really happening is internal panic. Their carefully managed image of self-assurance is being challenged, not by confrontation, but by your refusal to bend. You are a mirror reflecting everything they have ignored, the insecurities they've tucked away, the compromises they've made, and the effort it takes just to keep up appearances. The irony is that you're not trying to destabilize them. You're simply being consistent, authentic, and self-aware. Yet for people who rely on external validation to feel confident, your natural presence becomes a threat. It's easier for them to mislabel you than to face the truth of their own fragility. By exposing the gaps in their confidence, you force honesty. You remind people that true strength doesn't depend on appearances or the compliance of others. You are a living testament to self-assurance built on reality, not perception, and that exposure, while subtle, is powerful enough to make anyone who has relied on pretense uncomfortable, defensive, and undeniably aware of their own vulnerabilities. Number 13. You don't negotiate your identity for social peace. Most people spend their lives constantly bargaining pieces of themselves in exchange for comfort, acceptance, or approval. They soften opinions they care about, hide parts of their personality, and adjust behavior to avoid conflict. It becomes so normal that they rarely notice it. They assume social peace is worth the small sacrifices, even if it slowly erodes who they are. Life becomes a series of compromises disguised as civility, and authenticity is treated like a luxury rather than a necessity. You don't play that game. You refuse to edit your identity for the sake of being liked. You refuse to soften your thoughts, dilute your principles, or compromise your presence just to make someone else comfortable. You show up fully as yourself, in tone, mind, and action, and in doing so, you reveal a truth that many would rather avoid. Most people are living in quiet self-betrayal, constantly negotiating who they are to maintain superficial harmony. This refusal to negotiate makes people uncomfortable because it forces them to confront their own compromises. When you act consistently with your values, your presence becomes a mirror reflecting every time they've trimmed, hidden, or altered themselves. It doesn't matter that you're not judging them. Your existence is enough to illuminate the gap between who they pretend to be and who they've sacrificed themselves to become. The discomfort often manifests as irritation, criticism, or avoidance. People are drawn to social peace because it shields them from honesty, both internal and external. By refusing to conform, you destabilize that shield. You make it impossible for them to ignore the compromises they've accepted, and that exposure feels threatening. You are not seeking to dominate or provoke. You are simply refusing to betray yourself. And that refusal, simple as it seems, carries a quiet power that few can tolerate. You demonstrate that integrity is not negotiable, that authenticity is stronger than acceptance, and that living fully in your own truth is worth more than the fleeting approval of others. Your presence reminds people that self-negotiation is a choice, and sometimes the cost of maintaining peace is the very thing that makes life meaningful. Number 14, you are not antisocial, you're anti-falsehood. Most people misunderstand those who refuse to dumb themselves down. They assume silence, selectivity, or refusal to conform is a sign of coldness, antisocial behavior, or arrogance. They don't see that it's not about avoiding people, it's about avoiding compromise, dilution, and dishonesty. You are not retreating from society, you are retreating from pretense, from the constant expectation to soften, adjust, or perform in order to make others comfortable. You are unwilling to trade your authenticity for social ease, and that alone confuses and frustrates people. You don't pretend to be interested in trivial conversations. You don't exaggerate reactions to fit a mood. You don't bend your personality to accommodate someone else's insecurities. You show up as your full, unedited self, and that is enough to disrupt the social norms most people take for granted. The world expects constant compromise. People anticipate that you will lower your awareness, hide your intelligence, or modify your reactions just to keep interactions smooth. You refuse, and that refusal forces them to face their own reliance on falsehoods. Your presence, calm and unwavering, reveals a simple truth. Honesty doesn't need applause, clarity doesn't need validation, and authenticity doesn't require compromise. And that truth is uncomfortable for anyone who has been living behind a mask. They feel exposed, irritated, and even threatened. But none of it is about you. It's about the tension between your integrity and their habit of self-betrayal. You are not anti-social, you are anti-falsehood. You are selective because you value reality over comfort, substance over entertainment, and truth over convenience. You demonstrate that real connection doesn't require lowering oneself. That influence doesn't require deception, and that presence is powerful when it is unfiltered. People may mistake your clarity for distance, but it is actually a choice to exist fully without compromise, and to refuse the world's invitation to betray who you are. That choice is rare, unavoidable, and quietly revolutionary, and it challenges everyone around you to either rise to reality or remain comfortably asleep. At the end of the day, refusing to dumb yourself down is not arrogance, it's clarity. It's not antisocial behavior, it's integrity. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, every time you speak with honesty instead of performing for comfort, you are setting a standard that most people are too afraid to meet. You force reflection, challenge illusions, and quietly disrupt the social systems built on compromise and pretense. You expose the fragility of confidence, the superficiality of small talk, and the invisible ladders people climb to feel important. You show that real connection, respect, and influence do not require bending or hiding. They require courage, presence, and unwavering self-awareness. Living fully in your truth will never be easy, and it will make many uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not your problem. It's the reflection of the compromises they've accepted in themselves. You are a reminder that mediocrity is optional, that intellectual charity is a choice, and that self-respect cannot be negotiated for social peace. Your clarity, your depth, your refusal to perform, and your refusal to dilute yourself are gifts to yourself and to the world, even if people struggle to see it. So embrace it, own it. Let your presence be undeniable. Let your mind be unshakable. And let the people around you deal with their discomfort, because you are not here to fit into their scripts. You are here to live your own. If this message hit home, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. Your support helps us keep uncovering the realities most people are too scared to face. Stay blessed always.